Yeah, what we're going to be looking at is BCS. I'm going to be demonstrating in SharePoint 2013. Having said that, if you're using SharePoint 2010 or if you're using SharePoint Online, it doesn't really matter. A lot of what you're going to be learning here is going to apply to that as well. So there's certainly a lot of take home. Everybody on SharePoint 2013? Can we have a few using SharePoint 2013? 2010? Okay, so about 50-50. All right, great. Excellent. Just a couple of more questions. How many of you are looking at connecting to something like SQL, Microsoft SQL? Anybody for Oracle? Nobody. Okay, that's good. About anything else? SAP or... Okay, great. Dynamics, CRM, one or two. Okay, anything else I've not mentioned?
Can you connect to NDS?
Depends. Do you like that answer from SharePoint people? It depends. I've never tried it, but does it support ODBC or anything like that? Okay. So you should be able to. You should be able to. There's a lot of data sources where you can connect via a connection interface of some kind. So yeah, it should be possible. But I'll give you a proper answer once I've researched it. All right, so that helps me. I think the majority of people are connecting to SQL, but I will talk about other data sources as well towards the end of the session. Mainly what we're going to be looking at is the end result. This is obviously an information worker track. We're going to be having a look at what business connectivity services actually provides us as information workers. So we'll be looking at things like external lists, we'll be looking at external data columns, configuring search for our external data and bits and pieces like that, as well as why are we doing this in the first place? What is the point for our business of connecting to these external data sources? Okay. So once we've established that, towards the end, we will have a look at how to connect to these external data sources. Since most of you have put your hands up and said you're connecting to SQL, the good news is that you can do that code-free using SharePoint Designer. Okay, how many of you like writing code? Okay, a few of you. So you could still write code if you want to. That's the other good news. So there's several tools that you can use with Microsoft to go and connect to external data. So you can use SharePoint Designer to create an external content type. You can use Visual Studio to create an external content type. You can use Visual Studio and write code, or you can use Visual Studio. If you're using 2013, you can build an app, a SharePoint 2013 app, without writing code, although you're using Visual Studio to go and build an external list. Okay, so we can talk about that as well. There's also third-party products. I'm not at any liberty to say which one I would look at, but there are some third-party tools out there that also help you connect to other data sources as well. Okay, I think there's one hand up for SAP. There's a company called Theobald that work with business connectivity services specifically. And they have a great BCS tool for that. Okay. So, who am I? So as mentioned, my name is Brett Lonsdale. I've been in the Microsoft space for quite some time. Back in '95, I was working for FedEx as a Lotus Notes developer, for my sins. Any of the Lotus Notes developers in here? No? Okay, so I then moved on to training Lotus Notes and then started getting into things like VB5 and VB6 and teaching that. Cut a long story short, around about 2003, I started to show a bit of an interest in SharePoint along with Steve Smith, who's running this conference. We were both trainers at the same organisation and decided to form Combined Knowledge together to offer SharePoint training. And then I started missing writing code and formed a company called Lightning Tools, and we started building web parts and bits and pieces like that instead. So no longer was I training the products; I was building them, and that's where we are today. Okay, so that's a bit of a history lesson. There's a few things that I'm involved in here in the UK. One is the SharePoint Saturday UK, which has anybody been to SharePoint Saturday UK? Okay, few of you. Okay, so that's usually been run in the Midlands. There's one in London as well, which isn't anything to do with me, but that's going to be run in London, I think, in July, thereabouts. Also, SharePoint User Group. I help run it in Leicester, Coventry and Nottingham. And there's a couple of books that I've authored as well. So one of them, the top one, dates back to 2007. That's the Business Data Catalogue, what BCS used to be referred to as in SharePoint 2007. And we've got the 2010 Business Connectivity Services book as well. Myself and Penny Coventry, who's teaching a session at exactly the same time as me, co-wrote that with me. So there's a couple of books. There's no point in really doing a 2013 one. As I mentioned, if you are using 2010, everything here applies. So what I could do is just do a select all, copy paste, and do a rename of anything that has 2010 in it to 2013, and then add a few more bits about OData. And pretty much we're going to end up with the 2013 version of the book. Okay, so what we're going to be looking at, first of all, we have an introduction to business connectivity services. Even for those that raised your hand and said that you use BCS, lots of you just use it for one specific thing and haven't looked beyond that one specific thing. I see it all the time being used for just the external list or just for the web parts and displaying some data on the page. There's so much more to it when it comes to integrating with Microsoft Office applications such as Outlook and Word and Excel and, dare I say, InfoPath and even Visio, all work with business connectivity services, and you can build some really powerful solutions with it. If you looked at the keynote this morning with Jeremy, you saw some of the things that Jeremy was doing with SAP data inside a Word document or Excel document, sorry, and being able to write back to that. Well, you can do that sort of thing with business connectivity services as well. Okay, so we'll have a look at all of that, have a look at what business problems BCS resolves for us, and also have a look at who's involved in configuring and setting up BCS, because it's one of those things that can be quite complicated, and I've been on the receiving end of this. I was asked to be a consultant for a company up in Princeton. I used to live over in the States, so I was up in Princeton near sort of on the way to New York somewhere, and they asked me to do some work with a SQL database and build some BCS solutions. So up I went, I was there for 5 days, and I didn't get read permissions to the database that I wanted to connect to until the Friday morning. There was just politics all week long about giving me read permissions. So I sat there answering emails and being paid for it for 4 days whilst they debated this and eventually gave me read access, and by the end of day 5, we were pretty much building some solutions, although they weren't polished because I had to do 5 days work in a day. But that's the issue. You need to have the DBA on your side. You need to have the SharePoint admin on your side. You need to have perhaps developers, depending on how you're going to connect to these data sources, and then you can start working with the external data. Okay? So we'll have a look at everybody that's involved in doing all of that. How many of you wear all of those hats, by the way? Yeah, okay, so we talk about DBAs and SharePoint admins and end users. Sometimes they're the same people. So once we've covered that, we're going to have a look at the sort of things that you will be configuring. The external list, the out-of-the-box BCS web parts as well. We're going to have a look at the business data column, which you can use in any SharePoint list or document library. Have a look at some integration with Office and also the search, so how we can search the external data as well. And if my voice holds up, because I was very ill on Friday, and my voice is all croaky, this is not from the speaker drinks party last night. This is from Friday, being ill. So if my voice holds up, we'll certainly be looking at the configuration as well. There are a couple of other guys from Lightning Tools that have been here for, 3 months or something. So if my voice does go, maybe you guys can come and do a demo or something. Yeah. All right, so now we'll have a look at building external content types, importing the BDCM file and that sort of thing towards the end. So, lot to cover, we'd better get on with it. So, business problems resolved. Okay, how many of you have ever seen the SAP portal? Same person that wants to connect to it. What do you think to it? Is it nice and user-friendly? No? Okay. So, imagine you've got your supplier information in there, you've got your customer information in there, you've got employee information in there, and you want to go and look up some data. You want to find a customer record. Okay? Imagine you're a new starter in an organization, you've got to learn that SAP portal. That's going to be quite complex for that user to be trained on how to gather that information. when they may not be using SAP every day on a daily basis. Their tool might be SharePoint and Outlook and Office and so on. So what we can do is give them a much friendlier approach to accessing that data. Okay? Sure, the people that need to use SAP on a daily basis, they need to be trained on that and so on. But when it comes to perhaps searching the odd vendor or searching the odd customer or whatever it might be, or looking that information up, building some sales reports, that sort of thing inside SharePoint, this is your friend. You can use Business Connectivity Services to connect to that external data and make it a lot easier. Okay. So we're assuming here you've already got an investment in SharePoint. If you've got SharePoint, you might as well use Business Connectivity Services to get at that data. It's there for you. So a lot of organizations, they will use tools for different departments. Now you're going to go and choose, obviously, the best tool for a specific business process. So for your sales team, you're going to have some sort of CRM tool. You might choose Salesforce.com, or you might have Dynamic CRM or something else. Your accounts department, you might use something entirely different, Sage or whatever. So what you end up with is lots of different silos of data throughout the organization that don't talk to one another, but they're doing the best job for that particular department. So again, with Business Connectivity Services, we can mash up this data. We can bring data in from Dynamic CRM, bring data in from Sage, display on the same page all the customers that we've contacted this month and how many of them paid from the accounts team and so on. So it's that sort of information that we could present. So what makes all of this happen? What we've got is two different categories. I'll read them out to you because it's fairly small print in the diagram. We've got the SharePoint server on the left-hand side. All of these, by the way, apply to 2010 and 2013. So on the left-hand side, we've got the web parts. These are read-only web parts. How many people use the data view web part? Okay, how many of you date back to front page and the data view web part? One. Okay, so yeah, in Microsoft Front Page, you had the data view web part, and it provided you with a great tool to go and connect to external data and also SharePoint lists, and then you could do all sorts of things with it. Apply some conditional formatting and move the data around within the grid. It was really powerful. That's basically what those web parts are. Okay, so you've got these BDC web parts, Business Data Connectivity web parts, that will present to you a read-only view of your external data. So using SharePoint Designer in 2010, you can go through and style them just like you would do with the data view web part. That's fantastic. You can build some great looking dashboards with those web parts. Has anybody tried to do that in 2013? No? Okay.
Well, it's not there.
Yeah. So Microsoft, in their wisdom, and there are good reasons for this, removed the Design tab from SharePoint Designer. Okay. So there is no Design tab in SharePoint Designer anymore. So these web parts have now become very difficult to work with in 2013. That means that if you just want to, let's say you go and connect to a products table. Maybe you've got a list of your products and the currency and so on, and you bring the data into SharePoint, and what you'll see is your number column from a SQL database shows with 4 decimal places and no currency symbol. Right, so if you were in 2010, you'd open it up in SharePoint Designer 2010, right-click on the unit price column, whatever it might be, and say Format as Currency. Job done. Save it. You can move on. In 2013, you have to open up the web part properties for that BCS web part, and you need to go into the XSL editor. And they say it's an XSL editor. It's basically a rich text box with no formatting whatsoever, and it's just black XSL on a white background, and you need to go and fix it in there, so it becomes a lot more complicated. But having said that, they are still quite useful web parts for building dashboards. There is also the search. So this is specific. In fact, the web parts and the search are specific to just the enterprise version of SharePoint. How many of you are using enterprise version? Okay, good. So you will have them. So using the enterprise search, you can go and configure the search to not just connect to SharePoint lists and library and the content that's coming from that, but you can point it at Exchange public folders, and you can point it to file shares and so on. You can also point it to external content types, which is BCS data. So imagine you want to look for a customer where you can just go to your enterprise search, put in the customer name, and it will bring back a result. Okay? You can then click on that result and it will open it up, not in the application, but in what's known as a profile page. So that profile page has another one of these web parts on it, one of the BDC web parts, that shows you the data. Okay? And again, you can customize that and do what you like. We've also got the external data column. So how many use managed metadata? In fact, anybody sat on Laurie Gowan's demo today of managed metadata? Yeah? Okay, so did you look at building out a term store and all of that sort of thing? Okay, so that's fantastic. You're going to build this term store of terms that you can look up inside your lists and libraries, and that provides you with consistency, doesn't it? So when you're creating a document, if you want that document to be about a particular product that your company sells, you will look up the product term. Okay? That means when you build your views or you filter or you search, you're not going to come across misspellings of that product name or anything like that. It's going to be consistent because they looked it up from a term store. Well, the problem with the term store is it's not live data. Okay? What we've got here is perhaps a customer relationship management database where people are inputting customers all the time, and maybe we want to look up a customer against a document. So I could create a proposal for a particular customer. I go to store it in a document library. It would be great to be able to look up the customer that document is intended for. And again, we're not going to rely on salespeople to type in the name of the customer, because they will use abbreviations, they'll make typos, and so on and so forth. Whereas with the external data column, we're just simply looking up that data from the external data source. We've got an object model for the developers. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, question about external.
Sure.
The picker, I've played around with it. You can't put more than one item, so multi-values.
Good point. Yeah.
And that's really the kill what we want to do something.
Okay.
There's any way around that.
Yes. What I'm going to talk about next is, so the object model. So, okay, you might need to write a bit of code, but you can create a custom field type. And the object model there is an API that allows you to get at this data quite easily. You don't have to write that many lines of code to design your own picker. It's relatively straightforward. So yeah, any custom solutions that you want to build, you're not having to reinvent the wheel. The API is there. You can just go out and build your own solutions using the BCS object model. We've got the user profile. Okay, how many of you like filling out your Facebook user profile? Or LinkedIn? No? Okay. What's even worse is your SharePoint user profile, right? So if you take your SharePoint user profile, there's all sorts of things like what office do you work at, who do you report to, that sort of information. When it already exists, it probably already exists in PeopleSoft or some SAP system or something. But it's really useful once you've got that user profile populated in SharePoint. Audience targeting and people searches and so on become a lot more powerful if that information is complete. So what we can do is use BCS to go against and look up that user profile information as well and create a secondary user profile import into SharePoint. Finally, we've got the external list. So this was new in 2010. It gives you the ability to write back to the data source as well. So users are familiar with a SharePoint list. They're familiar with task lists and contact lists and announcement lists. And we give them the external list. They don't need to know that the data they're working with isn't actually in SharePoint. We can give them an external list and they can build views, they can filter, they can sort, and so on. The difference is the data just isn't actually there. It's in the back-end system still. Now this is really key. Okay, there are tools out there that will do things like a data import into a list. So it allows you to build maybe a contacts list and import your data from a back-end system of some sort. But if you're doing that, where's that data going? This might be over the head of information workers. I don't know, but I'll mention it anyway. So where's the data going that we import into a SharePoint list? Into SharePoint, so into the content database. Okay, and how many customers or contacts do we have in our organization? Yeah.
Hopefully lots.
Hopefully lots, yeah. So we are unnecessarily overinflating that content database. okay, by importing it. What happens if we start making record changes? Well, again, we saw in Jeremy Thake's demo today that we need to highlight these changes before we go and overwrite them in the back-end system. Well, this is linked. This is linking to the data. It's not importing the data. It's showing you the data. So when you do update it, when you write back, it's writing straight back to the data source. So record locking issues are unlikely to occur. Okay. So that's kind of on the server side. On the client side, I'll show you some of this, but we've got integration with Outlook, Excel, Visio, and so on, as I've already mentioned. What makes all this happen is something called the external content type. We build an external content type, and that describes the data that we're going to connect to. There'll be more about that a little bit later on. It has properties about how we're going to authenticate with the data. It has these different methods that we have to write to go and get the data. So there's a method that goes and gets all the data. There's another method that goes and gets one row of data. And there's methods that allow us to create, update, and delete data as well. Okay, so we'll have a look at that as we progress. So these are the people involved. As I mentioned, we've got SharePoint admins. They need to import the external content type that we just spoke about. We've got the database administrators. They need to give us permissions to the data source, make sure that we can authenticate with it. We've got the SharePoint developers who may be creating the external content types. So although they might not be writing code, you still need to know connection strings and that sort of thing to get at the data. And then finally, you've got the information workers. So they're going to be building the external lists, adding the web parts onto the page, and that sort of thing. Okay, so external lists. Let's have a look at them. Okay, so here we are. We've got a few different external lists on the left-hand side. So this one is coming from, I do apologize about my screen resolution. So this one is coming from SQL. Okay, you'll notice in here I've got the ability to create a new item. So I can just click on to new item in there. It provides me with a form, so I can complete that form right back to the data source. When I build this in the external content type, I can set validation and that sort of thing. So if there's certain things that do need to be filled out, we can ensure that they are. We've also got the ability to view, edit, and delete the item as well. That is optional. If you don't want to edit or delete the item, you don't have to create the methods to edit and delete the item. But we can also open up the item and so on and so forth. Okay. Up at the top here is a list ribbon, and you'll see some of the things are grayed out. Okay. Workflow is one of them. RSS feed is another one. The ability to create a quick edit view or a datasheet view is grayed out. You can't do that either. Okay. So a number of things don't show here because the data is linked to and not imported. All right. So we can't quick edit data when there's no batch operation to go and write lots of rows at the same time back to the data source. It's one row at a time. Okay. So that's why they are grayed out. You'll also notice, and take my word for this because it kind of takes a little bit of time to demo, but how many people have customized the forms for a SharePoint list in InfoPath? Okay. Ever tried to do it on an external list? Yes. You couldn't? Okay. All right, so here's a bit of a trick. So we go into a task list, or any other kind of list for that matter. We can go to the list ribbon, there's a customize form button. Okay. And if we go to list settings, in here is the form settings link. That does the same thing as that customize form button. Okay. So when we click that, it's going to open up InfoPath. If we go into our external list, where we probably really need that ability to customize the form, because wouldn't it be great to add a bit more validation and so on using InfoPath? So the button's not there. It's grayed out. We go to the list settings. Form settings link is still there, but when we click on it, it tells us that InfoPath does not support customizing the form used for this list. Okay, so it suggests you can't do it for an external list. Well, what you can do is go into SharePoint Designer. I'll show you this if we have time at the end. We can edit this site in SharePoint Designer, And in SharePoint Designer, you can go to, on the left-hand navigation pane, Lists and Libraries. Select that, choose your external list, and then you'll see Customize the form in InfoPath. And you click it, guess what happens? InfoPath opens up and you can customize a form, and everything's great. And all you did with SharePoint Designer was click a button. That's the only thing. You don't even have to hit the save icon in SharePoint Designer. You just click a button in SharePoint Designer. There's InfoPath. You can customize a form. Okay. So why they got rid of that, I don't know. It's
Didn't want to support it, probably.
probably yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yep. Somebody that designed the external list didn't know what it was. So, but yeah, we'll just disable that. Okay, so the external list is great. There are a few limits to be aware of and things like that. It's not always correct information that you hear. How many people have heard that you can only get 2,000 items in an external list? Anybody heard that? Okay. So its default is 2,000 items from SQL in an external list, and that's the threshold that you can set. But you can raise the threshold using PowerShell. You can bring that up to 5,000. Okay, that doesn't sound great. But it's not per external list. It's per view. So in here, what I can do is go to my suppliers, and notice I've got a view here called suppliers read list. Okay. What makes that available is something called a finder method. In the finder method, I go and get all the columns and all the rows, and I can add a filter on it. So my filter could be a limit filter. I could have a limit filter to say only bring back 2,000 items. Or I can have a limit filter that says the city is London, right? So if I have a customers table with, say, 10,000 customers in it, and I say, well, country is UK, that's my filter, and I'm going to name this finder method UK customers, I could do that, and I could have a US customers as well, and have another filter on it. So we could potentially have hundreds of thousands of items showing in the external list, but only up to 5,000 at a time per view. Okay, it just means you're going to be creating lots of different finder methods. Now that limit is in number of rows for SQL. If you're connecting to anything else, it's not on numbers of rows. You can look this up on. There's a TechNet article. Just look up BCS thresholds, and you'll find that there's it's volume of data, so size of data coming back from Oracle and other data sources. Okay, but that is your external list. To create them, you can create them from SharePoint Designer. We can go to add an app from any site. And in here, we will be able to select the external list. So there's the external list app. And we select the type, so the external content type. And there'll be a number of different external content types that I can select from. So there's suppliers again, so we can OK that, and let's just call this Evo suppliers. And that's it. The rest is up to us to build views, maybe change the views, and so on and so forth. Okay, so the hard work is in building the external content type in the first place. A couple of other things to just throw at you. In SharePoint 2010, there was no way of doing alerts. You can now do alerts in 2013. So you can be alerted to a change. And if you wanted to trigger a workflow or something like that based on the data that's changing, what you can do is create an event listener. It does involve writing code, but it could be done if you really need it. So web parts, we'll just have a very quick look at these. Kind of already introduced them. So what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and add a new page. Evo web parts. Okay. And what we're going to do here is just split this into a few different columns. And in the left-hand column, we can go to Insert Web Part. And under Business Data is the Business Data List web part that we're going to add. Underneath that, I'm going to add the Business Data Related list. And next to both of those we're going to add the business data item web part. So there's just a few of the web parts that you get. So first of all, the business data list. We open up the properties, really easy to use. We just simply go through and select the external content type that we want to display. So here's customers. Okay. Notice here I've got the view. What do you think the view is? I've only got one thing in my view. So the finder method. So that thing we could use for the external list could also be applied here. So if we wanted to just show UK customers or US customers, if we've created multiple finder methods, you'd be able to select them from this point. Okay. And there's your XSL editor, if you want to make changes to that. Other than that, we hit apply. Okay. And we have a moment of awkward silence, and then it displays. So first thing first, I'm going to click this thing. It's just for these guys at the front. They're only like 18, 19. That's known as a floppy disk. Okay, it's still the icon for saving things. All right. So what we can do is just go in and edit that page. So in here, I can edit the web part, and then we have the edit view button. Okay. And here's a warning to save your changes, which is why I went and did that. So I can hit OK. And in here we can go and do a number of different things. We can select which columns we want to show inside the web part. So we could get rid of things like fax machines and phone numbers and bits and pieces like that. Okay. And then there's another set of options, and they're grayed out. So this top option here is saying which items do I go and retrieve. Okay. Now, it's going to go and get all the items. I can't choose the other two options. I could display a toolbar and allow the user to choose what items to display. So like country equals US or country equals UK again, and so on. But it's grayed out. Or I could select the last option and set the criteria myself and say what this web part is going to display. But again, I can't. So these are directly related to the filters that you build on your finder method when you're designing your external content type. You need to go and build those filters on the country column in order to be able to filter by country using those. Now what you could do instead is, if we scroll down to the bottom, is filter here. Right? Doesn't that do the same thing? You can see country is equal to US. Why not?
Because it's filtering when the data's already been gathered.
Yeah, it's already gone and got all the data, and then it's doing the filter. Okay, and these are one of the reasons why people are running into performance issues with BCS. So you go and build your filter first, and then it goes and gets the relevant data from the database. Okay. So there's a number of things that we can do. So let's just click on OK. We see a lot less data coming back. What I'm going to do here is open up the second web part properties. So this is known as the business data item web part, and we're going to go and choose exactly the same external content type. Okay. It asks me which item to display. The view is calling my specific finder method. This is a method that only gets one row of data based on the identifier that you provide it. Now, when you build these external content types, you must have at least one column that is unique. There's no point in having a composite key. It doesn't work. Okay, you need to have one column that is unique. If you're calling a stored procedure or a view, just go and create a new column and have it unique. Doesn't matter, then BCS will work. It needs to be able to select a single row.
Any type of data?
Doesn't.
I mean any string?
I'll say it's probably got to be text or numerical. Yeah. So I could tell it what item to go and get, but the nice thing about this is I can leave that blank and tell it via a web part connection what item to go and get. Okay, so what I can do is simply hit the drop down here, go to connections, and tell it to get the item from the customer list. Okay, so we'll do that. So that's now connected. We'll OK it. And now I've got this little handle on the left-hand side. So if I go and select this customer that I can't pronounce, over on the right-hand side, we see all the address details and so on. Okay, so we've got a nice little picker there to go and preview the data. The next web part we're going to take a look at is the related list. So what you must have is something called an association. How many of you used like Microsoft Access or something in the past and you've built relationships between them? Yeah, so same thing. You get to build associations between the primary key in one table and the foreign key in the other table. So we can go and open up the web part properties for the related list. Go and choose a different table. So this is orders. Okay. And it has the relationship. That's known as an association. So I'll build the association in the external content type. Let's click on OK. And one last thing I must do is connect the web part still. Okay, so I go to the same connection, send an item to the orders list. It can provide a connection to more than one web part. Okay, so we'll save and close that. So now we've got the, let's just do this. Now we've got the ability to select a customer. Now I can see the orders for that customer at the bottom of the page, as well as over on the right hand side there, seeing more details about the customer. Okay, so the rest is up to your imagination. Imagine you let loose on that XSL editor, or you use 2010 and you can do it all for free in SharePoint Designer 2010. You can make that look quite a nice little powerful solution. Okay. So they're the web parts. Custom actions, we'll come to those in a short while. The external data column, let's take a look at this. So what I have is some purchase orders. Okay. So my purchase orders are just documents in a document library. What we've got here is the supplier, and I've also got the customer, okay, as data. So what we can do is when we upload a document or we create a document, we can look up the data from the external system. So I'm going to go up to the Files tab of my ribbon, create a new document. That's going to open up Word, and we'll kill two birds with one stone here, because what I can show you is not just how to modify those properties in SharePoint, but when you're creating the document itself, what we can do is click into the document and look up the external data. Okay, so I want to look up a customer. Pavlova Limited is a little bit better than the one I chose before. So we'll choose Pavlova Limited. It's just done like a mail merge type thing inside my Word document. So I've got the customer address and everything as well. Okay. Not only that, is it populated my document information panel at the top. Okay. So we'll just save this as Pavlova PO. Hit save. Save to purchase orders. Okay, and we'll refresh our view. So there's the Pavlova PO created a few seconds ago with that metadata set. Okay, so that's the integration between the one of the Office clients. So really powerful stuff. We could, of course, just go through and edit the properties as well. So when we go and edit the properties of that document, we've got the picker here. Okay. Now, a couple of things about this picker. Yeah, you can't pick more than one item. This is using the specific finder to allow me to select one item to populate that column. So yeah, you can't select more than one like you can with manage metadata, sure. At the top here, you've got a filter. And I can't filter anything. Why do you think I can't filter anything?
filter then?
I didn't create a filter. Yeah. So I need to create these filters in the external content type, otherwise the filters aren't available. Okay. Now there's another reason why we would want to create a filter for these. It's known as the item picker. Has anybody ever seen a little red error message pop up when you've used these? And it says you can only have...
I don't know what it is, but I've only got about 108, and I want that's available.
200.
Less than
Yeah. So it will show you the first 200.
that. Right,
It can only show 200 items. Okay. So that's another reason to create a filter. Because if you create a filter, then you can bring below the 200. One of the types of filters you can create is known as a wildcard filter. So I can have a wildcard filter on the company name. So if I type in ABC and hit filter, it will bring back all the customers beginning with ABC. Okay, and so on. Then you can go and select them. So that's your workaround for that. Okay. But otherwise, that's a very powerful tool for looking up data that is live from the external data source. And then something goes wrong. But that's because I'm demonstrating, and it wouldn't be a conference if it didn't. So there we go. I could have recorded my session. It's more exciting this way. So with the external data column, yeah, you can look up your metadata. Another downside to this, no content type support. So this is a column that you can go and add to any list or library, but you can't add it to a content type. Right? So you've got to save out your library as a template if you want to use this. To build it, so this is all fun with the resolution as well. Create column. So I go and create a column. All we're doing here is selecting this one, external data. Okay. So we give it a name, whatever it might be. Come down here and look up the external content type again. So we can go and grab suppliers, choose OK, and then we are selecting the values that we want to display and the value that we want to store. So I can store the company name, but go and display maybe address and city. And then click on OK, we get the column added. And that's all you have to do. Okay. The bit in Word, this is known as a quick part. To insert that, I just go to the Insert ribbon. Over on the right-hand side here, you go to Document Property, and here's all your columns from your document library. So this isn't BCS specific. This is getting at all of the columns for a document library or for a list. So we can just scroll down, and there's the supplier details. So I can go and grab the supplier name, drop it on the page there, and there it is. You've got your lookup to the external data. Okay. All right, so that's a little bit of the Office integration. New to 2013, inside an external list, you can click onto Export to Excel. Okay. You could do that in 2010 as well if you wrote a bit of code. That is in the book as well that we wrote, but if you've got 2013, it's out of the box now. There's a ribbon that says Export to Excel. It will give you a one-way sync back to the external list as well. Word we saw with the quick parts. InfoPath, you can open up InfoPath and you can design forms. So let's say you want to have a form to register a new supplier. You could have an InfoPath form for people to fill out, and it writes back to an external list if you want to. We've also got Visio, so you can build gauges and so on based on data returned from external data. SharePoint Workspace if you're using 2010, and we've also got Outlook as well. Now Outlook comes in when you build your external content type. You set something known as the Office type. So the Office type can be task, it can be contact, it can be event, and so on. And you'll just map the columns from your data source to the Outlook properties. So when you are in an external list and you say open in Outlook, it will open it up in Outlook as a contact, or it'll open it up in Outlook as a task in your calendar, or whatever you want it to do. Okay.
Just a quick question about we were sold with 2010 that like connecting to an Outlook list within Outlook was brilliant.
Yep.
And we found that at the beginning it was, but then when we went actually within another site collection, those lists would not update. So I'd got all of my sales reps out looking at data sheets that they thought were the right versions that hadn't been updated for 6 or 7 months. And there was loads on Google about it being, you know, never connect a list or a library with Outlook below like your homepage level or in a sub-site below that.
I recall seeing the same sort of thing. I can't remember the outcome on that.
Yeah,
I'm afraid, but
not to use it
right,
we
okay.
wrote a tool to get out of it. But has that been fixed now then?
I'd never looked, so in all honesty. But yeah, if you can give me details at the end, and I'll ask the relevant people.
Okay.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so let's just take a quick look at search. Had all ready to go. Here we go. Okay, so it's getting near to that day where we search for lager. Anybody know how to get free lager tonight?
Ask you.
Yeah. So Lightning Tools is sponsoring the SharePoint. So pop by the Lightning Tools booth, get yourself a ticket for a beer. All right. So we'll do a search for lager. And we'll wait. There we go. So it's brought back some Laughing Lumberjack Lager, which is probably a lot better than Draft Beck's that was in the hotel last night. Or we've got Outback Lager as well. Okay, and this is data that is coming from the external data source, not from within SharePoint. Okay, it allows me to open it up in a profile page, all being well. Unless I deleted that external content tab, then it won't. But that's the page, and you can customize these results. Okay, so just like this is the content by search web part behind the scenes here. So you can customize the results to look great, show little pints of lager if you want to next to your search results and all sorts of things. And you've got refiners, and you can create custom refiners and all sorts of bits and pieces like that. This data is coming from SAP. So we're getting a mixture of data coming from SAP, but also we might have other documents that have the word Germany in them as well. Or something like that, or contacts or something. So what we can also do is build custom page or custom search result pages. So where you've got your people search and your all items, you could go and build another one that says dynamic CRM or whatever, so that you can distinguish the results. Okay. So in order to build that, what we can do is go to our farm search administration. Into the search service application. So this is all in central admin. Okay, and we've got content sources. So we can select content sources, and you can see I've got a few content sources already built that are indexing SAP data, Northwind, Oracle data, and SQL data. Okay. So all we do is we click onto new content source, and we select a line of business data. Okay. So we choose the line of business data, and just like the web parts and everything else, you can go and tell it to crawl a specific external content type. So you could go and get your suppliers or your customers or whatever. Okay. You can then set the schedule for when you want it to crawl that information. So when does it do a full crawl? When does it do an incremental crawl? And so on. Now, if you're smart, you'll also notice that inside most tables, like in Dynamic CRM or something, you might come across a column in the data source called last modified. Okay, so what you can then do is there's a property that you can set when you build your external content type for that column and specify that it is a timestamp field. So when you then do your incremental crawl, it won't bother crawling it again if that data hasn't been updated. Okay, and that gets your search indexing to be much improved as well.
So with that, is there a limit on how much it can bring back, or can that literally do your whole data?
No, a good performance tip here is build what's known as an ID enumerator method and just add the primary key column, your identifier, to it. SharePoint Designer out the box will use the finder method. And on your finder method, what are you going to have? A filter.
Yeah.
So it's then not going to filter it all. It's not, sorry, going to crawl it all. So build a specific method just for search.
Which shows
That has no filters. Yeah, goes and gets it all. Otherwise, yeah, you're going to get cut down results coming back. You'll have that strange issue where you can only search US customers or something like that. Okay, so that allows your search to work. Okay, in the service application, there is a business connectivity services service application. In here somewhere. Sorry, managed service applications. So under business data connectivity, this is where we can import the BDC model. Okay, so your BDC model is basically an XML file. You can use SharePoint Designer and it will write directly to this. And these models will be available throughout your SharePoint farm. It's effectively like a farm solution. So these are all my external content types and different things you've got in here. One of them is set metadata store permissions. You must do this. You can be the farm administrator, you can be the database administrator, you can be God if you want to, and you cannot do anything with BCS until you go and set this. Okay, so what you must do is go and add even the farm admin in here with these 4 permissions. Okay, so once you've done that, you can start adding other users and giving them permissions as well. So the permissions you can give to people are execute, that allows them to execute the methods, the finder and the specific finder, create, update, delete, and so on. You've got edit to be able to edit the properties in the web parts and whatnot. Selectable in clients, so in the Office applications, and then set permissions itself on the external content types. What you can also do is propagate that down to any other BDC model that you import. So you have the same permissions set on all of them. Okay. So that's great because that means, well, it doesn't really matter. As long as we can authenticate, we can still control the permissions for each SharePoint user in here. Okay. We've also got the ability to create a profile page. The profile page is the page that gets displayed at the end of the search results. So when I click onto a customer from my search result, it will open up the profile page with the customer details on it. All you have to do is click onto, let's just find one where I've not created one before. So there's one at the top. If I select that, you're going to see the worst SharePoint pages in the world. Okay, so we hit the create profile page. We get the working on it. And you get this. Okay, and you might just think, oh, it's failed. And it's just a little link to say you must open it in a new window. So what they could have done was just have it open up in a new window, but they thought they'd display you that instead, and then they show you this, which is a few paragraphs about building a profile page, and you just OK it, you got your profile page. Okay, so that's the profile page built. You've got to re-index the data before the profile page works. So if you've already indexed it, go back and re-index it again. It has to do a full crawl, and then the profile page will show in the search results. So you can set permissions in there, you can build the profile pages, you can also add actions. Actions are great. They're basically URLs with a parameter. You can pass any column to the URL. So if we go to Google, I mean Bing, so if we go to Bing and we search on a customer, it's going to have the parameter at the end of in the address bar. You'll see what we searched on. So we can basically build that string. We can say bing.com !, equals, and point to the company name column. Okay, so it will then allow us to select a customer, and in the drop down we'll be able to choose Bing customer or something like that, and it will do a search on them. You can control whether it opens it up in a new tab or a new window or anything like that. One solution I used that for was using Documentum. If anybody's familiar with Documentum as a document management tool, it has all of the metadata about documents stored inside an Oracle or a SQL database, but the files themselves live on the file system. Okay, so a customer wanted to use SharePoint and Documentum to display the Documentum documents. So we used BCS to go at the metadata in Oracle, and we used a custom action that would open up the document. So when they click open document, it would link to the file, and they'll be able to open the file from there. Okay. So lots of different solutions that you can build like that. So building the external content type, what we'll do is we'll pop into SharePoint Designer. SharePoint Designer 2013. Okay. And we'll open up my BCS site. It doesn't really matter what site you open. You can open up any site you like. You're not going to make any changes to the site itself. You're just going to build an external content type. And it'll be available in all sites. So in here, on the left-hand side, you've got external content types. Okay. So we'll choose that. Whilst I'm in here, let me point out, if I go to lists and libraries, here's all my external lists. Okay. If I choose customers SQL, design forms and info path, that button works. Okay. And then that allows you to write back. So if I go to external content type, we can build a new external content type, give it a name. It's Prod Evo. Just a couple of tips as we go along. You've got an internal name, you've got a display name. Make sure the display name makes sense to your users, because that's what they're going to see. You don't want it to say dbo.abc123 or anything like that. Here's the Office item type that we spoke about. So this is where you control, that controls Outlook, that's all it does. So when the data goes into Outlook. The external system is where we build the connection. So it's remembering my connection from last time. So I'll just remove connection, add a new one. These are the three things that you can connect to. You can connect to SQL, you can connect to .NET, you can connect to WCF. You can connect to SQL Azure using the SQL option. So if you are going to be using Office 365, you can use SharePoint Designer to connect to SQL Azure and get that data into Office 365. So if I choose the SQL Server option, click on OK, you've got to know the database server name. You've got to know the name of your database. And then how do you want to authenticate? So authenticating, you can connect with the user's identity. This is Windows Auth. This might work beautifully in your development environment, where you've got your SQL Server and your SharePoint box on the same physical machine. It'll work lovely. And then you'll go and try and do the same thing in production, and it won't work because your SQL Server is on a different box to your SharePoint server. And you'll get what's known as the double hop issue. Okay. So what is recommended is to use one of these two options with secure sign-on, the secure store. Sorry, single sign-on, secure store. So we'd go through and create a secure store application. All that does is it maps credentials together, you give it a name, and then you authenticate using that. Okay. I, on this hand, can get away with the option that we've got selected. So there's my Northwind database. I've got the tables, views, and stored procedures. And we can go down. What did I call this table? Prods. So there's products. So I can right click, and this is where I can create those different methods that we spoke about. So this is known as the read item, is the specific finder. We've got read list is a finder, and then we've got the create, update, delete. If we want to build an association so we can do that related data thing, that's this option here, and so on. Okay, so we're just going to go and create all operations, step through the wizard. We've got the columns selected there. If I want to trim some out, I can do that. There's the timestamp field that we mentioned. So if you've got a timestamp column, make sure you set it. So that will improve the search indexing. You've got some validation that you can set on each column. So if there is a required column, you can make it required. You can choose whether or not some of these show in the picker. So you don't have to have all the columns to show in the picker. You can pick and choose which ones show in the picker. So on and so forth. Some great options there. When we get to this page, it says you must add, or it's a good idea, it's strongly recommended to add a limit filter. Okay? And this is because of your view. So this is against the finder method. So because there is the limit of 2,000, which we can increase to 5,000, and we might have 10,000 items, we we should set a limit filter so it, under no circumstance, goes and gets more than the 5,000 or whatever. So we add a limit filter. We set it on the identifier. The filter type is limit, and that's it. We just choose OK, set the value, so I could set it to 2,000. Okay, and then hit finish. Or if we want to, add another filter, which could be a wildcard filter. So you could set that on the company or a product name or something like that. So if I hit finish, that's created the operations for me. I can go back and create additional ones. So again, right click, do another read list operation. That's where I'm building my views with all the different filters on them and so on. But other than that, I hit on that little floppy disk icon. It writes all this back to a database, or the properties are written back to the metadata store. And we could also create the external list from here as well. So I could just say create list. At that point, give it a name and so on, or let's go to add an app again. Go to external list, and we call it Evo Prods, right, or something like that. Or Prods Evo, there it is. So we can select that, and we're good to go. Okay, we should have our data being displayed. Okay, so that was using SharePoint Designer. That's basically what we just did in the external content type. You can use Visual Studio. You can go and connect to OData. This is more specific to Office 365 or SharePoint in the cloud. So what you might have is a database server on premises with your SQL data or what have you. You want to display the data in SharePoint Online. Well, a couple of ways you can do that is you can synchronize the data to SQL Azure, or you could create a service that exposes the data as OData and build a connection against the OData source. So you can use Visual Studio to connect to OData and deploy your external content type as an app, if you want to, from within Visual Studio. That is what's known as a web-scoped app. It will only make that data available in that web, in that site. It's not available throughout like the BDC model file that you import. Okay, there's a few different authentication things. If we had time, we covered permissions. We talked about that. I think we're good. All right, thank you. Yeah.